All right, lesson two deals with the judicial selection process in Texas, and it's going to talk about some other methods that are used by different states across the United States. and um, this has been a topic of significant debate in Texas for at least since 1995, but probably longer ago than that time period. And so we're going to look at some of the issues associated with it, and then we'll continue looking at this issue with some activities and assignments that you will be doing as part of your grade. So there are a number of different judicial selection methods across the United States, and none of them are perfect. Some may be a little bit more perfect than others, but none of them are perfect. And so we have to sort of look at each one and see the pros and the cons of each one, and determine whether or not it's something that Texas should look at. And in Texas, citizens expect judges to be competent. They expect judges to be independent and not subject to political pressure. And they expect judges to be responsive or subject to democratic control. And so each one is going to have strengths and weaknesses regarding each of these issues. So there are a number of different methods. First of all is election by legislature, appointment by the governor, partisan elections, which is in bold because that's the type that Texas utilizes. Then you have nonpartisan elections, and then the merit or Missouri system. So we're going to look at each one of these a little bit more in depth. Election by the legislature. This is a system that is left over from the colonial system in America, and it's actually only utilized by two different states, Virginia and South Carolina. And in these states, the being appointed or elected as a judge by the legislature is sort of seen as the piece de resistance of your political career. It's the pinnacle, the apex of your political career. And when studies are conducted looking at the individuals who are elected to judgeships by the legislature, it's nearly 100% of these judges are actually ex-legislators who were in the state legislations, and so legislatures. So there is this, this situation where it kind of becomes a capstone to a successful legislative career, and maybe these individuals aren't chosen for competency, but perhaps chosen because they've been successful, and this is sort of that next step for them politically. But like I said, it's only used in Virginia and South Carolina, and so it's not going to be utilized very widely across the United States. Appointment by governor. And there is great potential for competent judges if they are appointed by the governor. And this would sort of mirror the federal level where the president appoints judges and the Senate approves those. So there is very significant potential for the selection of a judge who would be competent, but it doesn't always ensure competence. Sometimes a governor might utilize this system as a reward for friends, for political friends. We would think that governors would choose competent judges and wouldn't choose somebody incompetent, but we can't guarantee that. We can't guarantee that they would necessarily choose the right person. But one of the problems with an appointment by a judge or a president is that once they are appointed, they're no longer responsive to anybody, and they're not responsive to voters, and they're going to be able to exercise some great independence. And if we look at this at the federal level, this has occurred. And when Supreme Court justices have been appointed to the bench, they have exercised some political independence or some judicial independence that the presidents that appointed them didn't really imagine would happen. And there's a story that Dwight Eisenhower, who appointed two judges to the Supreme Court when he was leaving office, and asked what his regrets were, he said, "I have two of them, and they're both on the Supreme Court." And so once they're appointed, they sort of have to play that political game to get appointed, but then they can exercise great independence once they get to that federal bench. And so governors aren't likely to select unqualified people for judicial appointments. However, governors might not be able to convince the best candidates to agree to serve. And so maybe the appointive system rules out completely incompetent, doesn't rule out the appointive system probably rules out completely incompetent, but it does not necessarily result in the appointment of the most competent people to serve as judges. And so, it's got its drawbacks, got its benefits, got its drawbacks. Partisan elections. This is the Texas style of selecting judges. Their judges are going to run in political elections. They're going to actually run for this as if it were a political office, and that's essentially what it becomes. And their party identification is on the ballot, so we will have to go to the polls and vote for a Republican judge or a Democratic judge. And typically, when you are a judge, you're supposed to be sort of above politics, and so this sort of mixes politics and mixes the judicial system in a way that might not be perhaps the best way of doing things, but they are responsive to citizens, because if they have to become elected, they have to get enough people to vote for them to win that position. And so they do have to be responsive to citizens, but this means that they will lack independence in their interpretation of laws. And so if we look at trial court judges in Texas, they run for election every 4 years. They're partisan elections. Appellate court judges run in partisan elections every 6 year for 6-year terms. And the only exception would be the municipal judges, which are appointed by a mayor or a city council. And so we might see in this situation maybe judges not having the political courage to rule a certain way because they have pressure put on them by the electorate. And so there is some the veracity of some of the decisions might be called into question. Then there's this nonpartisan election, and in a nonpartisan election, it eliminates the what is known as this problem of straight ticket voting. And straight ticket voting is the system that allows voters to vote for all candidates of a single political party by making a single mark, and that has resulted in an increase in the number of Republican judges in the state of Texas. So when you eliminate nonpartisan elections, the individual running for a political or running for a judgeship, they do not identify with the political party. Their name is on the ballot, but they're not. They may be a Republican, they may be a Democrat, but it's not going to be determined, it's not going to be elucidated on the ballot. And so you actually have to base your decisions on something other than political party label. You have to know something about the individual, or I guess in some cases just guess, but you have to base it on something more than just straight ticket voting. And sometimes straight ticket voting is detrimental to the judicial system, because individuals who have been in office and are competent people and have been judges for a while are voted out on political whim because, straight ticket voting occurs. You've got a whole bunch of Democrats that come out and vote straight ticket, and so all the Republican judges in office are going to be thrown out, even if they're good judges and competent, and they're being replaced by less experienced judges and less competent judges. And so there's some issues that are associated with that straight ticket voting. And nonpartisan elections try to eliminate this issue. So it doesn't solve the problem of incompetent judges, but it might ensure a little more continuity. Less competent judges being thrown out just purely based on the whim of the electorate, and so you have to decide on who to vote on as a judge by more than just their political preferences, their political alliances. Then you have the Missouri, or what is also known as the merit system. And this is where it's kind of a hybrid system between an election and an appointive system. The governor appoints candidates from a list of names supplied by judicial panel. So there's a judicial panel. They come up with a list of names of competent individuals, and then the governor will select a candidate from that list and appoint them to office. Once appointed, that judge will sit for a specified term of office. And at the end of that specified term of office, they stand for re-election by voters. So there is this appointment process that hopefully will allow for competent individuals to be selected, but then there's also this responsiveness issue where they are held to a standard by voters, and the voters are going to decide if they get to remain on the bench or not. So what happens is when they go to the polls, essentially what happens is going to be that voters will vote yes to keep or no to vacate the seat, but there is no opponent. And so it's just a straight up or down vote, yes or no. And so there is no opponent, and so you can't, it's not like you're electing someone else to this position. If this position is voted no and they vacate the seat, then the governor will appoint somebody else, and the process starts all over again. 21 states use this for appellate judges, and 15 states use it for trial judges. And it seems like a good system that will ensure competency, but there is really no research to suggest that it allows for very competent judges to keep their positions on the bench. And in a lot of cases, a very high percentage of these elections, these voter elections to keep or to dismiss the judge, are going to turn out in a yes vote, because it's really hard to defeat somebody if you don't know who their opponent is. And so, in theory, it's a really good plan. Who knows if it's actually very effective? But there has been some significant, there's been a significant reform movement in the state of Texas regarding how we select our judges. And over the past 25 years, this has been an ongoing debate in our state. In 1995, the Texas Supreme Court established what it was known as the Commission on Judicial Efficiency. And what this commission did was they studied the system of electing judges and the other systems out there of selecting judges, and they made recommendations on a method of judicial selection, what the best possible method would be. And they made these recommendations for the 1997 legislative session, because remember, Texas is a biennial state, and they only meet every odd number year, the legislature. And so they make these recommendations to the 1997 legislature, but the legislature takes no action. And so it's going to be the legislature that has to create a reform of the selection process in Texas, and they take no action. In 1999, in the next next legislative session, the legislature is going to introduce several bills to change the judicial selection. So there's going to be some action on this movement in the legislature, but none of those will pass. And in 2001, the next legislative session, 7 bills calling for either nonpartisan elections or the or appointment of judges are going to be introduced, but none are passed. In 2003, 6 more are introduced, none passed. In 2005, 2007, 2009, 2011, bills are going to be introduced into those legislative sessions for nonpartisan elections or the merit system. None are going to be passed. All right? And so the straight ticket voting system is going to have a significant effect on our judicial system in Texas, and it's going to be one of the things that advocates of reform are going to point to, because if we have this the straight ticket voting, there are going to be instances in which we've had some very significant turnovers in our judicial system that sort of break continuity. And so let's see, in 1984, many incumbent Democrat judges will lose their seats in large urban counties to unknown Republican challengers because of Republican straight ticket voting. In Harris County in 1994, only one incumbent Democrat was reelected, and Republicans defeated 16 Democrats because of straight ticket voting. In 2008, voters reversed this and returned Democrats to most judicial offices in Harris County. Many of the Republicans lacked judicial experience, and some had no courtroom experience at all. And so there's going to be some significant back and forth between the individuals who are voted into office. In 1994, an individual named Steve Mansfield, who had a very limited legal experience and had no experience in criminal law, was elected to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the highest court for criminal matters in Texas. He did not have any experience in criminal law, but he is elected to the Supreme Court for criminal matters in our state. And so after his election, there were going to be some significant questions raised about his qualifications. And so, this raises the possibility that he could have been incompetent to serve there and should have been perhaps ineligible to serve. And a lot of people called for his resignation. Another instance occurred in 2002 when Stephen W. Smith, who was the chief litigant behind the 1996 Hopwood versus Texas Supreme Court case that limited the use of racial quotas in selecting law school students at the University of Texas, won election to the Texas Supreme Court. Despite being a Republican, he had little support from statewide party officials and few endorsements from the state bar associations, but he still managed to win election because of straight ticket voting. So he will receive about the same percentage of votes as other Republican candidates for statewide judicial office. And a study by an individual at the University of Houston demonstrated that about 54% of the votes cast in Harris County in both 1998 and 2002 were straight ticket votes. And so, a Republican running for county-wide office had a 14,000 vote head start. And so it's not going to be based on anything about his competence or his abilities or her experience. It's going to be based strictly on a judge's association with a political party. And so there is going to be a lot of calls for reform, and this is going to be a debate that continues in Texas, and that even in today's in today's legislature, there are bills that reform this, but the legislature is reticent to pass any of those bills lest they rock the boat and they start dealing with things that change the status quo, which they're usually not comfortable doing. And in today's, you're going to read an article about this, but in this year, Nathan Hecht, who is the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court, actually gave a speech on the state of the judiciary to the legislature when they came into session, calling for reforms to this method, getting rid of these partisan elections for judges. And so it's going to be this ongoing reform movement in Texas, and you're going to actually be looking into this a little bit more. All right, so we're going to stop here, and you can continue on looking at the information on the legal system in Texas in that next PowerPoint.